Midlife feels like a turning point because it is one. Not a crisis, not a collapse. A turn. The kind where what was behind you and what's ahead of you suddenly have a different relationship to each other than they did before. And the man standing at that turn, if he is paying attention, gets to do something very few moments in life actually offer. He gets to choose his direction. I've been thinking about what a turning point actually is. Not metaphorically, literally. When you turn, when you change your direction, two things happen simultaneously. Something that was in front of you moves behind you, and something that was behind you moves in view, moves into view. And for a moment, right at the turn, you can see both. The path that led here and the path that opens ahead. And that moment, the one where both are visible, is what midlife feels like for a lot of men. Not the crisis of arriving somewhere wrong, the clarity of standing somewhere real, with enough distance behind you to see clearly and enough life ahead of you to do something with what you see. I think most men sense this about midlife, even when they can't articulate it. That it's a hinge. Yes, a hinge. That something is ending, not badly, not finishing, and something else is beginning to be possible. The ambitions of the first half, the proving, the building, the forward motion toward milestones that felt urgent and organizing. And that chapter is closing or has already closed. And the question that appears in the quiet isn't what to do next in that chapter. It's whether the next chapter is going to be written by the same hand that wrote the first one. The same values, the same definitions, the same version of success inherited from somewhere else, or something different. Something more deliberate, more honest, more fully the man's own. And that question, standing at the turn with both paths visible, is what makes midlife feel the way it does. But there is a strange part. Most men at midlife look at the turning point and feel something they interpret as loss. The youth behind them. The open future narrowing. The sense that the defining chapters are already written. And the grief is real. I don't want to minimize it. But most men misunderstand what they're actually standing at. Because the turning point of midlife isn't the beginning of diminishment. It's the end of apprenticeship. The first half of the man's life, however accomplished, however full, is largely spent learning the world, learning the rules, learning what a man is supposed to be, and how to become enough of it to function. The second half is something else entirely. It's where a man gets to apply everything he learned, not in service of someone else's idea of life, but in service of his own. And that shift from apprentice to author, from following to choosing. That's what the turning point is actually offering. And here is something I find genuinely interesting about the psychology of midlife. The first half of life operates on a specific kind of hope, the hope of becoming. Always emotion towards something, always a version of the future where the real life begins. And that hope is powerful. It moves mountains and it justifies enormous sacrifice and effort. But it also keeps a man slightly at a distance from his present. Because when the real life is always ahead, when the meaning is always in the next achievement, the current moment is mostly infrastructure. It's necessary, but not quite the thing itself. And this is where things become interesting. Because at midlife, that structure starts to shift. The future stops being primarily the address of meaning. And the present, the actual days, the actual relations, the actual texture of the life already built starts to carry more of the weight. For the first time, really, the man stops waiting for the life to begin and starts to understand slowly, sometimes with grief, that it already did. It's been happening, all of it, all along. And what he does with that understanding, whether he grieves it or inhabits it, is what the turning point actually is asking. And something changes after 40 and after 50 in what a man finds meaningful. In the first half, meaning tends to come from expansion, more, bigger, farther, faster, the accumulation of achievement and experience and identity. But after 40 and after 50, something shifts. The meaning starts to migrate toward depth rather than breadth. Not more things, more presence inside the things already there. Not bigger life, realer life. The conversation that actually say something. The afternoon that isn't optimized for anything. The relationship that has room for the whole person, not just the performing version. Most men notice this shift without fully naming it. They find themselves less interested in adding to the life and more interested in actually inhabiting what's already there. Less drawn to the next goal and more drawn to the question of whether the current one is making the days worth feel living. That's not resignation. That's wisdom. Wisdom arriving in the form of a changed appetite. And it only comes from having lived enough to understand what the accumulation actually costs. Here is the deeper truth I keep returning to about why midlife feels like a turning point. It's because it is the point in a man's life where the outside and the inside are finally required to negotiate with each other. For most of the first half, the outside wins. The demands of the world, the career, the family, the obligations, they have the loudest voice. And the inside, the private self, the genuine values, the things a man would choose if he were choosing only for himself, they accommodate, they wait, they adjust, they defer. But at midlife, the inside stops being as willing to defer. Not loudly, not dramatically, just persistently. A quiet, growing, insistent voice telling you that the private self should be given more space in the life. That's the genuine values that now you should allow to shape at least some of the choices. That the man who exists underneath all the roles should be allowed to show up somewhere. And the turning point is where those two, the outside and the inside, finally face each other. Not in opposition, but in negotiation. The man who navigates that negotiation well, who finds a way to honor both the life he's built and the life that's been waiting inside it, he tends to find the second half richer than the first half. Not easier, not simpler, richer. So let me ask you something. Standing where you are right now, looking back at the years behind you and forward at whatever is still ahead, what does the turn ask of you? Not in a dramatic, life-changing sense, not in a way that requires everything to be different. Just honestly, what is the version of yourself that the first half of your life didn't quite have room for that the second half might? What got quieted that actually deserves to be louder? And what was deferred that now is ready to be taken seriously? What did you learn in the first half that the second half finally gives you permission to use? Because the turning point isn't just a hinge between past and future. It's an invitation to bring the whole man, not just the functional version, the whole man into what comes next. To stop managing the life quite so carefully and actually start living it quite a bit more honestly. Maybe you've been standing at this turn for a while. Maybe you've been looking back more than forward. The forward direction is there. It always was. But now, midlife feels like a turning point because the accumulated weight of a life lived forward finally creates enough mass to change direction. All of it. The years, the experience, the losses, and the arrivals. The things that worked and the things that didn't. The version of yourself that was built for someone else, and the version that was always underneath. All of it builds over time into enough material to ask a different question. Not what do I need to do next, but who do I want to be in what's left? And that question, arriving with the full weight of everything behind it, is what makes the turning point feel the way it does. Not like an ending, like a beginning that finally has something to build on. But finally something that is real. Finally, it has something real to build on. I'm saying this because I'm thinking about the uncertainty of the first half. Not knowing yourself, not knowing the cost, not yet having the experience to understand what actually matters. That's gone now. What's left is something a younger version of you couldn't have had. Clarity. Hard won, imperfect, genuinely earned clarity about what you have, about what you have learned, about what you value, about what the remaining years are worth spending on. That's not a diminishment. That's the turning point delivering on its promise. I think the reason why midlife feels significant, even to men who can't quite articulate why, is that it's the first moment in a man's life where he can see clearly enough to actually choose. Not just react, not just follow. Choose. The noise of early adulthood, the urgency, the proving, the relentless forward motion toward an horizon that kept moving as he approached it. All of that has finally quieted enough for something honest to become audible. And what a man does in that quiet, whether he turns toward it or away from it, tends to shape everything that follows. So, if you're standing at that turn right now, if the first half is behind you, and the second half is beginning to come into view, look at it. Not with fear, with clear eyes of a man who has earned the right to choose what comes next. Let me know if you liked this video. The only way for me to know if you hit the like button, and subscribe if you're not subscribed yet. And let me know also in the comments what is your experience of midlife. Meanwhile, let's meet in the next video that you will find here, and I will see you there.